Are you a leader in customer success, pre-sales, professional services, support? Do you work behind the scenes and roll up your sleeves to make sure that customers are happy? Renew. Then this is for you. Welcome to the GSD Podcast. Welcome to the GSD Podcast. Getting it done. Services, success, and software. We'll talk with the pros that have been in the trenches, getting service teams off the ground, launching new types of groups to service customers, or running agencies that don't have a product attached to it. For the pros, by the pros. This is the GSD Podcast, and this is your host, Jeff Kushmerek.
All right, everyone, welcome back. This is Jeff, and I had a few weeks off from the podcast because I had switched jobs, which we actually get into a lot. Andrew and I, Andrew Fink, who's a good friend of mine, we were kind of buddies in arms over the last few months talking about different places we were getting asked to go interview. Do we want to go in certain directions? And, you know, when we talked about this post show, I don't think we weren't sure if each other wanted to talk about this during the interview, but it was basically, or during the podcast, but it was basically sometimes when you take a position and you are where we are in our careers, there is this other thought of, well, if this doesn't work out, how does this position set me up for the next position? So in the end of the day is if you can do good work, you can do good work, and people will recognize that. But we did get into a lot of really interesting concepts because Andrew and I had kind of worked at some of the same places that we've had similar guests on the show, like Acquia and some other places, Endeca. We kind of took a little bit of a right turn and really focused on the sort of career change aspect for this episode. So, you know, in terms of the gap, I had a couple of weeks off where I was focusing on the family and wrapping things up in my previous job and getting ramped up on the new one, which is great. So anybody who's interested in that, I'll happy to expand on that later. But sit back and enjoy. Andrew's an amazing guy. I think I mentioned this during the conversation, but when Andrew came aboard, I was just super impressed with him. He sort of was what I envisioned a lot of consultants to be. And really, really learned a lot. Very even-keeled, but open and honest guy. So I hope you really enjoy it, and we'll chat later. Hold on one second. I hit record. Here we go. Okay, Andrew, you can hear me?
I can hear you.
I can hear you. So joining me today is Andrew Fink, a long time friend of mine, yet another Endeca alumni. But the great thing about Endeca, it's like going to college and then everybody else goes somewhere else afterwards, right? And so there's just so many people that have different experiences. The other note I was going to tell people to kick this off is if we don't cover too much personal stuff is because Andrew and I went to go meet at the Marriott and go record this in this really cool location. And they were playing some smooth jazz, which would have been in the background the whole time. So we just decided to go eat food for an hour and a half and shoot the shit about everything, including some OCD fitness and nutrition stuff and kids' college, which made sweat bullets immediately start coming out of my head and stuff like that. So welcome, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Great to be here.
You know, I don't know if I've said this to you before in person, but I just remembered when you were hired and or the first time we met, I felt like it was the first time I had met like a real consultant at Endeca. Like I was like, who's this guy? It was, you know, Andrew comes walking in tan with the slick back hair and the, you know, look you right in the eye and give you a good handshake and just super knowledgeable about like, you know, how to actually talk to customers and be a good consultant and everything like that. So, you know, that's when I was like, whoa, we're stepping up our level here. So
great perspective. It's funny growing up with German parents. That sort of hard handshake and looking in the eye was kind of ingrained in me.
Just try it again. Whip with the ruler.
Right.
Too funny. So, speaking of like coming walking into Endeca, which at that time was, I don't know, let's see, we're talking 2006. So we started, getting some good traction and everything, but still had a lot to learn in terms of like being a real company. For you to come walking in with some of that presence and that been there before, but not cocky. I just want to just be clear about that. Walk me through the background that got you there.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. I actually spent, right before that, I spent 5 years at MetLife. So very different world for me after spending a good chunk of my career doing pure consulting with deploying CRM, ERP, sort of large scale stuff. I kind of went to the dark side and joined MetLife as a guy that ran a couple of divisions, first in Boston and moved out to Jersey with MetLife. They actually moved the family. So very different world where you're managing a P&L. I always joke with folks that my job was to basically manage a team, plan a budget, and then for the next 9 months explain why the budget was off. So you literally, it was literally a budget exercise, and it had lots of customers on the business side of the world, but it was just a different world. And so I ended up spending 5 years at Met, but realized that in order, it's not an organization that you want to spend a long time in your career, but just ultimately because I felt like the people that got promoted there were the ones that kind of came in, headed under the desk, and never really tried to implement change.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone just sort of focused on their neighborhood. No one really wanted to focus on other neighborhoods, and it was really difficult in my role to deploy technology across multiple groups. So I end up coming into Endeca in kind of a smaller role than I probably was anticipating, and I was running a region.
Right?
I was running a region, yeah. So that was MetLife was my first experience where sort of having to really look for a gig that was in a completely different arena for me, from consulting and large scale to software.
Yeah. And that must have just, going from MetLife, which is huge and process heavy and everything else like that, coming into Endeca, that must have just been kind of a big shock for where we were at the time. So.
Oh, for sure. And, working with some interesting personalities in New York, that, it was a real good entree into the services world of software.
Yeah. And you were in federal too, right? You were dealing with all those guys. Like, I just totally forgot about that whole thing. We had a federal practice.
Initially it was the regional world, and then I think late in the game for me, before right when Oracle was about to acquire, it became a federal practice with Jeff Murphy, because we end up having to focus on that a little bit with the new sort of twist in the technology.
Yeah, that's right. And that's a foreign world to me. I only dabbled in that a little bit, and we did a little bit more of the public sector stuff when I was there. But I do remember interviewing one guy who was coming in to be sort of a consultant role. And I was like, oh, so what's the toughest? He'd been working for one of our security clearance customers. And he wanted to work for us. I'm like, oh, so that's great. What's the toughest thing you've bumped in so far? And he's like, well, somebody came in from the field with a bullet through their hard drive, and I had to get all the data off of that. I was like, oh my God.
That's funny. Yeah, we actually, I interviewed a guy who he was working at Gitmo in Cuba. So he was commuting to Guantanamo Bay and was part of the team on the analytics side that would interview folks and have.
Are you kidding me? I never knew. Oh my God.
Yeah, it was really cool. So he would only be able to fly back to Miami every, few months. We were trying to get him on Endeca's team, but he didn't want to leave his little cushy job at Guantanamo Bay.
Oh my God, that's crazy. So talk to me, and we chatted a little bit beforehand, because this next thing is something that I've never done, which is funny because we'll talk about the whole utility player thing a little bit after this. But talk to me about the transition to Real Decoy, which I'm going to be jealous. I always wanted you guys to hire me, but you guys never would. But I'm just kidding. It's like, that seems like such a cool thing, but no, I was at Brightcove. Don't worry about it. I was totally. But sorry if it sounds like massive thunder. I think somebody's pulling sofa upstairs. It's the pearls of working at home. I'm early in the morning, can't come up with the industry classifications, but I'm working at a professional services company that is specializing in installing another company's software. Which to me, I've always tried to line those up with my companies, because it seems like you're just getting leads passed over to you left and right, and you just kind of, do what you said, which is put your budget out there, hire some people, and make it happen, right? So
that's right. So
yeah.
What was interesting, so Endeca get bought by Oracle, decide it's not the right move for me to jump into that big company.
Yeah.
But I knew that Oracle, in the broadest sense, is a software company, not really a services company. So they partner, right?
Yeah.
Real Decoy had invested, I don't know, 50 or 60 folks just focused on deploying commerce and some of the other technologies with Endeca. Mm-hmm. So I reached out to one of the founders, Richard Isaac, and we talked about, hey, you've got a great practice in Canada. You've got some folks in Jamaica. What if I join and build out the US and your UK practice? Again, with the focus being, let's grab a lot of these customers that we had at Endeca that probably don't want to work directly with Oracle. In some cases they can't. And let's build a practice on that. And so we actually came to an agreement. I consulted for a couple of months, and then started hiring folks in the US, and we got American Express.
Oh wow,
yeah. We got some really big brands, right? So Home Depot, a couple of car guys, the auto parts guys. Brought in some really great I guess call them the next stage in leadership. So Jim Richmond, David Worth, Hanen in Europe, Sean Smith. We had a really great team. We scaled it to probably, I don't know, 16 or 17 people over the course of 3 or 4 years. Had a few million in revenue, and it was going well until I think what naturally happens in this world when at some point Oracle will take a technology and it just becomes part of their new world, and you no longer have that. You're no longer differentiated from the other consulting companies. You're just another one in the list. So no longer were we getting the calls from the sales folks directly. It was more like, hey, put your name in the hat. We may call you.
Oh. God. Yeah. So I didn't, before we finish on that, I didn't realize they had their own sort of retail practice before that.
There was about 50 folks, but all in Canada. They had a large focus on federal in Canada as well.
Okay.
Their Department of Defense. And so we ended up also diving into federal in the UK and the US, trying to get into that market. And that was the other technology from Endeca. So it wasn't commerce.
Yeah.
It was more the BI. So, we kind of went into two places, and it was great. We had to build infrastructure to all the process to support a new consulting company, but leveraged the Oracle environment sales folks to help us close deals, and then our relationships with our customers from Endeca. So it was a great way for me to understand and learn how to build a consulting company. Not necessarily from scratch, because we weren't funding ourselves, but really
a little bit of a cushion. So
it was great. And it is also it was eye-opening in how difficult it is to scale in a sole proprietary, where it's sort of a one or two investors, no outside investment. We couldn't scale the same way, and at some point I think we started running into a wall financially.
Actually, and that's I'm glad you started talking about that, because I was going to ask you, so what was it? It sounds like a great gig. I was wondering what everybody's got pains and difficulties. Is that sort of what it was? It was just being bootstrapped and kind of dependent on services dollars in and services dollars out.
Yeah, well, and the mothership, right? So we were so reliant on Oracle, and as soon as they started turning their eyes away from us, things started to dry up. And so you can only go back to your customers so many times before you got to find new customers. And I think that was a challenge. And a few of us started seeing the writing on the wall when it became commerce for Oracle, no longer Endeca and ATG, right? So then all of a sudden we're playing against the large ATG players. Same with the other analytics engine. It became more big data. And so I think we realized at some point we weren't going to be different, and we were too small to be playing against some of these folks. And so that's where a bunch of us decided, working back with the founder, we decided it made more sense to sort of go back outside and start something new. And that's where I ended up landing.
Are they still around? Or
they are, but they're small. Canada and Jamaica. That's really it.
Yeah, Jamaican market. It's
that was their offshore. Yeah,
the worst.
Kingston, Jamaica was their offshore, and you talk about a war zone. Not a good place to visit.
So can we get into the offshoring thing a little bit? Because I didn't realize you had touched that. And, I do a lot of that.
Yep.
I did not know. So Jamaica, what's the quality in like standard of work that you're used to from those resources?
Yeah. Well, just to put in perspective,
just answer the question.
Yeah, they drive to work and they can smoke pot on their way there. So it's a very different environment. Whereas when I met Life,
that's called being a millennial, Andrew.
It is. Yeah, I know.
I'm sorry.
when I was at MetLife, we had 60 folks offshore in India, and with Cognizant and Patni, and you come to a certain standard in terms of how you operate there. It was difficult in Kingston, I think, in Jamaica, just because it's a very different personality. But a lot of these guys had really good tech degrees. I think there was a subset that worked hard, but where a few of us really had a hard time is there wasn't that commitment to go over and above when you needed to get stuff done.
Yeah. Were you, and sorry to keep focusing on Real Decoy, but I, in my opinion, or sort of, since all the times we talk, this is the job that you had where you had to focus a little bit more on sales. Is that correct?
Yeah. So as the GM,
you feel like you were wearing a bag?
There was a lot of that. And the good news, I had a couple of guys who were good at selling. Yeah. But it was sales and delivery. In the earliest sense of customer success for me, in the sense it was coming up with a plan to deal with our existing customers and upselling and cross-selling. Yeah. We couldn't lose brands. We had to keep American Express and some other ones happy. Yeah. And then also, continue to grow. So it was definitely sales and delivery together as the GM.
Did you enjoy selling? Like, did you feel like a slimy sales guy, or did you have people underneath you? Were you actually out like pitching and trying to win the business and things like that?
So it was a little of both, but I never felt like we had a couple folks that were a little on the slimy side in terms of sales approach. Whereas I feel like some of the folks on the US and the UK team, like Mickey in the UK, was fabulous. It was fabulous, right? So you came in with a different perspective. It's how do we get additional functions to other use cases, other groups. Versus trying to sell smoke and mirrors or whatever. But and we had a couple of strong sales folks in Richard Isaac, the lead. So that's I think it was kind of a combo, but we never approached it as pure sales. It was more extensions.
Right. And you're in, I was just talking about this with John yesterday, but like, you should feel like you're trying to help them. Like we're trying to help your organization, not like, let's find the easiest way to get you guys to buy something so we can, just go make some more money. So that's right. So interesting. Like Acquia is there. I kind of want to approach the Acquia and the select stuff kind of, after we talk about Real Decoy and what you did at Endeca. This concept we were talking about, you called it being the Brock Holt of professional services, which I wear that hat as well too. Where do you feel it was when Acquia happened, or it was more in Endeca or beforehand, where you were just sort of getting lots of different professional services experiences, but not staying on one path and becoming like, oh, I'm the master of ops or things like that?
That's right. Well, Endeca had 3 or 4 roles. And then you add Real Decoy in there as a new version of supporting Endeca, and then obviously a completely different thing when I joined Acquia and this technical account management group. So, I just felt like it's about leading a team, building supporting processes, and ultimately I think for you and I, we've been really leading customer engagement right for so long that it was really around how do we support and grow enterprise customers, regardless of what role it is.
Yeah. That's right. Because at Endeca, I keep telling people, like, they didn't have I'm air quote here, customer success or account management for a long time. It was us. It was in services. And as people, if they listened to this talk before, you couldn't implement that software without professional services. It just was not something that you could do. It was just very technical and hard to do. So
that's right. That's right.
That's not the sales stuff, but like, what? It's super hard to install this stuff? I'm like, yeah, but it works really good. So
Well, what I find interesting about today, when you sort of look at the marketplace, is we were talking about the sort of generalist versus specialist. And I think for most of my career, I've sort of been in the gray area where you kind of have to hop to where you need to hop, and you have to, you have to be able to dance when you don't know all the answers. And I think because I started in pure consulting for the first 10 years, I kind of was comfortable in gray.
Yeah.
And whereas today I feel like there's a lot of black or white, right? So, well, I just do ops, or I just do account management, or I'm just in services. I feel like, you and I kind of came from a different breed where we were expected to do a lot of different things. You want to put me at first, great. If you want to put me at third, great. I don't care.
Yeah.
I'll figure it out.
Yeah. Like, hey, Jeff, we need you to go, just focus on getting partners onboarded for a year. Like, oh, okay. Sounds great. Yeah. Tell me where do I stand? Oh, I stand over here. That's great. So the challenge that we've talked about, so just so people know, Andrew and I both have switched jobs in the last month or two. And we would get together and we would just talk about some of the frustrating things that we bump into sometimes at the same company, all in friendly competition. And I feel like we could spend a really long time talking about that, while trying to, in a little bit of a structured way. The one thing I know that I remember we were having breakfast, and the look on your face when I said it was like, but Andrew, I'd love to hire you, but I need somebody who's also run a customer support group. So unfortunately, I need to go find somebody more senior. So yeah. I know exactly what you're thinking here, right? And it's like, well, I'm just going to bring a director on board to run that, right? Like, but there's this thinking about the specializations. And like, oh, wait, I don't see you've got, for me, it was like, oh, you've never had customer success. So sorry, we can't hire you at a customer success role. I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, so.
Yeah. And also scale. So, you've managed up to 60, but I need you to manage 100. And for me, it's like, it just changes the structure, but it doesn't change your approach to the process. Right. So to me, that's very short-sighted for these companies. And I get it if they're trying to go from 100 people to all of a sudden you're managing 600, right? Yeah. Like Riggs, he's managing a huge organization. Great. I totally get you want that scale, but to go from 50 to 100, it's not that big a deal.
Yeah.
But I think what I'm finding is a lot of companies, they have their checkbox and, oh, okay, you haven't done customer success, Jeff. Oh gosh, but you've done services, great, but we need more than that. And I talked to tons of companies in the last 2 or 3 months where, it was that I felt like, I hit 9 out of 10 boxes, but I didn't hit that 10th, and therefore I was out of the mix. Yeah.
And what's your standard objection to when one of those things come up, right? I'm just curious because I had my own one that I think
I think you said it. So, okay, I haven't done support other than, managing a small team at Select. Well, you're right. I'd bring in a pretty seasoned director that can scale it, knows how to, deploy Zendesk and understands all the bells and whistles, are comfortable with a 7x24 model,
right?
Knows people throughout the organization. That's my first hire. And that's what I did at Select. I hired Duke, and Duke was
awesome. Yeah.
Right. So he's going to take on that support function. And guess what? He was one of one. He scaled it. We brought in a partnership. So he did all that work, and I would work with him on, how to make sure, both I understood, but also how do we get this to the next level?
Right. So, it's you hire somebody good enough that you can trust them, and then you're there as like air cover, somebody to talk to, somebody that they can go into the office and vent if they want to. But just in general, like, you're an expert here. Like, I'm not going to go buy, my O'Reilly book on how to run services or support or something like customer success. You bring in the people and you manage them. At least that's the way I look at it. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. And Jeff, I can tell you the first 2 or 3 months before Duke started, it was uncomfortable, right? So I didn't know a lot of answers, but at the same time, I think we're both smart enough to be able to, pick up stuff and ask for help. But, it did take a little longer to get things deployed, but once you get that person in place, I think it's fine. And the same for you with renewals. I think you bring in a person that understands the process and understands how to create that structure. I don't think you're the guy, who's going to be leading the account management, individuals for the long term, right? Until you get that experience.
Right. So you find, has that been the most frustrating part, especially when like, that they're wrong, right? And it's just, so it's funny. I bumped into a situation where the organization was like 20, right? It was like 20 people. And the COO was basically like, well, in 3 years, we want to be over 100. I'm like, great. That's a very scalable model. And they're like, but you haven't managed 100 people. I'm like, that's correct. But you're at 20 right now. And the guy, I think you even told me this, the guy the guy that manages 100 to 200 to 500 people, he doesn't know how to manage 20 people.
Oh yeah. And I see it, I saw it at a couple of different places, right? I saw it at one, they grew so fast. I could tell all the people in there were over their head. But I also look back at a situation where you got a guy like Chris Comparato who joins Toast at 80 people, and now he's got whatever 1,800.
Oh yeah.
He never led. First, he was never a CEO.
No.
Good for Steve Papa and those guys for giving him a chance. But also, at some point, he's way over his skis in terms of his experience. But gosh, look at a smart guy who can figure things out. He can bring in the right leadership, Emmanuel and others, and all of a sudden, boom, he's got a team. He's going to be close to 2,000 people. Yeah. And you know what? He's still CEO of the company. Good for them for sticking with him.
Yeah. And I think, I can't remember where I heard it, but it was, hire people for the job you think that they can do, right? Like, can this person do that job? And that's what I was basically would say to those things, which is, I can handle this job. Like, they're like, oh, well, you've never worked with virtualization. And I'm like, do you know how difficult some of the things, I'm like, also, do you want your SVP or chief services officer or whatever you want to call it? Do you want him, down in the weeds diagnosing a system failure because of a memory issue? I'm like, no. So
that's right.
Crazy.
Yeah. Well, and I also think, Jeff, as this world has morphed from pure services to, we want to be a SaaS success. It's become very confusing for hiring CEOs and COOs to understand what it is they need, because it is a relatively new role in the last 4 or 5 years. And to find people with that experience where they've managed all their check marks is difficult.
Yeah. No, that's good. So on that note, you don't have to sort of say the company, but where you're moving to, but describe the sort of role that you're going to and what's that and how that's kind of excite you.
Well, another great example. So I interviewed for a lot of the sort of chief customer, VP success roles, had probably 5 or 6 in the hopper, a couple that were more under the CRO and others that were direct to the CEO.
Yep.
But there was an opportunity. Literally, I interviewed with a company called Data Robot, which I'm happy to talk through.
Okay, great.
And
great company.
The initial conversation was, and again, I strongly suggest everyone who's going through this process to leverage their network. So in my case, Sean Smith, who worked for me at Real Decoy, is at Data Robot. He said, hey, they're hiring like crazy. I'll throw your resume in. And he popped my resume into Greenhouse internally, and he put me in like director of ops role. And so I got my first interview with him was his director of ops thing, which wasn't a good fit, but it got me in the system.
Yeah.
And so my first conversation with this guy, Paul's like, yeah, not a great fit, but we'll put you in the system. And I sort of wrote off Data Robot as never going to see them again. And then like 3 weeks later, the COO called me directly and said, hey, saw your resume. I've got this interesting opportunity. Yep. And so just like our experience in sort of playing in gray and being a generalist, it actually helped in this case, because he was looking to build a new group that kind of being incubated under the COO, where they're going to go from selling pure platform to actually building out solutions and use cases. And guess what? You and I spent the last 15 years building out use cases for the Endecas of the world and the Aquas of the world where they can't sell a platform. And so he wants to build a team from sales through delivery, just like my general manager experience at Real Decoy, to actually build out these solutions and sell them to the market. They feel like they can make more money. What an interesting opportunity. And it's no longer just about, post-sale or pre-sale. It is a full end role. So it's going to be really interesting.
That's awesome. No, that's great. And there's like all sorts of, morals and, inspirational messages you can post off of that. But it's kind of like you waited for the right thing, right? And you also took a chance and said, I'm going to, go in and talk to people and show them that, I know my stuff and that I can adapt and learn things and do things. And they're a smart organization that recognizes that and weren't just looking to check the box of, the rec that they put out there. And it's a great story.
And it's absolutely refreshing. The fact that you find a guy like the COO is Chris Devane, he's, totally gets it, right? Totally gets you have to hire smart people and that these smart people may do different roles throughout their career at Data Robot. So, my lesson, I think, over the last couple of months was, after 25 plus years in the market, really, one, take the time to find the right opportunity, leverage your network. And I sent the big thank you out yesterday because I felt like, the network, I can't do it. You can't do it without your friends, family, and your network. And that's huge. And the other thing is, I think we all forget about, we go from job to job or from career to career, or we're always working. And just to take that time to have a couple of months to spend time with my graduating daughter or whatever it is.
Yeah.
It was a huge opportunity for me and the family to actually just sort of get grounded again before jumping back in the world. And I think we forget about that. We forget to take time between jobs and really, sort of kind of get re-energized.
I'm just laughing because I took like 3 days.
Right. You jumped right in.
But that was because basically it was like, look, we have this pitch. It's like a multi-million-dollar deal, and you would own the relationship if we get it. So it would be a good move. And I'm like, no, absolutely. Like I would feel better about knowing more and being part of that meeting than just kind of walking into it and saying, well, what do we sign up for? So, but yeah, that's pretty funny though. Yep. I wanted to take the time. And then I wound up like taking like a week of not doing too much, but that's great, especially since you did have a daughter that was going through the graduation and getting ready to go off to college and everything like that. So that's fantastic. So, and how much did you do a lot of Ironman training in the
I did all that stuff. Yeah, it didn't help, but I did all that stuff, actually just, and I think, just other stuff that your honeydew list, right? Your checklist that starts building up. And I think, and to some degree, I still got up and went to work, do my workout, come back. But I just found that, having time to, I don't know, just kind of figure out what you want to do next and how to go after it is important. Because I, like you, have just jumped from job to job. And a lot of times I jumped for relationships. In other cases, it was because it was mandated, right? There were some forced situations, and that's going to happen in careers. But and I saw this on LinkedIn the other day. It's like I actually had the first time in my career, I had the opportunity of time, and I haven't had that in so long. I think we just forget about it.
Hey, can we just get into that a little bit deeper? Because it's something I haven't really talked about before, which is, you said take the time to figure it out. Like, is that your classic like pro-con list? Is that like a chart, or is that just like handwriting? Like, did you have a process, or you just kind of sat around and thought about it a little bit? I'm just as fascinated.
No, well, obviously we all think about what we want to do next, and it's part of the process of jumping into looking for another job and having the resume updated, all that sort of stuff. And this was different. And I did have I'll call it opportunity sort of comparison. Mm-hmm. But what was funny about that is I started getting further down the process with a couple companies, and you and I intersected in at least one of them. I had
why I'm laughing is because I didn't get a job because my brother worked there, which is just
it's So, but I found myself doing a comparison. But what was interesting and different about this time versus others, I had a list of 6 or 7, and I was deep in all of them. I had multiple meetings in each, and I felt like they were going well. All of a sudden, they would drop off, and that found my list of 6 went to 10 and then dropped to like 4. So it was a really interesting process. And I found that the process is taking longer. It's not, the market's great, but it's more competitive. Like, more people have customer success on their resume, whatever it is. They're also, they want people to, they want to be able to have enough candidates. So the process takes longer. But I wanted to make sure I was jumping into the right situation. So I sort of had my own things to my own checklist of, okay, do they have the money? Do they have the right leadership? Yep. Is there the right product and the right market opportunity? Otherwise, you're stepping in the same situation. So I had my own sort of checklist. But I also had time where I could just read a book, which I haven't done in a while.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, that's awesome. And I sent you a suggestion. I absolutely
thank you.
David Goggins is Can't Hurt Me or something like that. I did the audiobook on that, which I suggest for everybody just to see if they can push themselves a little bit more. You did touch on one thing I just wanted to add a couple of points to, which is the researching the company. And it is as much about you interviewing the company as much as them interviewing you. And don't be afraid, especially if you're talking to startups, ask about, when do they run out of money, right? When's your splat rate? When, is that going to happen? What's your relationship with your investors and all of those things? Because I've joined companies that ran out of cash like in 2 months because I didn't ask what their stability aspects were. And also poke around, take a look at the the company, the executive team, look at the other places where they've worked and do your research on them, and then look at the investors. I think that's big. I don't know if you took a look at your investors, David Robot. I know they're very good, but all that's a big picture, and it's what drives that company, and it's what their DNA is. And I have not taken interviews just because I looked on Glassdoor and then I looked at the profiles of people, and I'm just basically like, no, this would not be a good match.
Well, and Jeff, to that point, I interviewed with 2 different Vista equity companies, and in each case I had to take multiple tests. The last one I literally took 3 tests. One was a time test, and it's a very different leadership style for Vista than other organizations, and they're actually quite, I'll use the word intrusive in terms of being on the board. How they lead is very much hands-on, and so that you have to be aware of that walking in as a leader in an organization.
Yeah, it's crazy. And that, no, I had a friend who's general counsel at some very successful companies, and she went to go it's kind of like, maybe that's not quite the scale of the company I want to go to, but they're doing a good thing. So she went into this company with a sort of a purpose-built, mission type of attitude about it. Like, I'd like to go help this company because they're doing good things. And they gave her one of those tests that they give every, kid out of college and things like that. And it was, after 15, 20 years, some of those tests are hard for us if we're not used to taking those types of things. And it immediately, soured her opinion of the company. And, we judge every employee, and they all have to go through these things. And it's like, bring some common sense into your hiring practices every once in a while, right? It's
it's a great point.
Yeah. So that's great. And I'm glad did you feel like you're also taking on stuff that you've not done before? So this is a learning experience for you as well?
Yeah. So, big part of this role is to also oversee a lot of the customer facing data scientists. So typically that falls under an engineering function, and that at least at Select, it was under the head of engineering, though we interface directly a lot. That's a different skill set, right? So you're going to have sales folks who are driven by numbers. You're going to have delivery folks that are driven by success of delivery and making sure customers are happy, successful. But the data scientists are a different breed. So I think that's going to be a little different. In my mind, that's what's going to require a couple of different personality types from my own end on the leadership style to make sure they're supported as well.
Yeah. Hey, speaking of the leadership stuff, I did want to just touch on a couple of things, which I do in a lot of these conversations with people, just to see what their philosophy on it is as well. I'm a big believer of hierarchical organizations. So a couple of quick bullet questions, as a manager, what is the upper limit of direct reports that you should have?
As soon as I start getting close to 10, I'm worried. So I'd love to say that, 7 to 8 is
seven's like when you need to start opening recs, right?
Yeah. Cause it becomes, and especially if you're doing weekly one-on-ones and other side meetings, it becomes a lot. And so when I think at Select, I had at one point, it was 12 or 13 until we could bring in some leadership, sort of structure. Too much. You need to be less than 10, in my opinion.
Right. If you're doing even half-hour one-on-ones and you've got 10 people, right? There goes, a quarter of your week.
Right.
Those usually go longer than that. Then you've got the random drop-ins where it's like, hey, can I just ask you a quick question, or can I just come in and bitch about something, which is what you need to do as a manager, is provide the support on that. And then there's, the other question is, and this really, I see this I see it more of a problem in development managers more than project managers and things like that. Where do you draw the line, or what's your philosophy on I'm a great developer, now I want to manage people? Because we see that happen a lot, and sometimes it's a terrible move.
That's such a hard one. I had, the big decision I had to make, and I didn't actually get to finish it at Select, was, okay, I've got some really good engagement managers, and a couple of them have thrown their hat in the ring to lead the engagement managers.
Yeah.
So do you take one existing and promote, which I always believe in, you want to get people to keep moving through an organization, if it means to lead your team, or hire from the outside with someone with experience of leading this more seasoned group. And the couple folks that threw their name in the ring, they weren't quite ready. So it would have been difficult conversations, because I didn't think taking someone who's just done the function without leading the function, plus it's a more difficult scenario when you're taking someone who's got peers and all of a sudden they're their boss. So, I was debating about whether to go external or not because of that reason. I think we do that in sales as well. Folks hit their quota 2 years in a row and all of a sudden we throw them in a management position.
Manager role, yeah.
And it's not necessarily the right answer. People have to be, the leading is hard, right? And managing is hard, and it requires, and there's some people point blank say, I don't like to deal with the bullshit. Well, then that's probably not a good role for you.
Right. And you know what's I've never seen work well either, now that you've said that, is that whole thing of like, oh, well, I'm going to be on a team with them and I'm going to manage them and kind of judge them, but I'm not going to do the review. And I'm like, well, you can stick your ankle in the water, right? Like I don't like dealing with the bullshit. I don't want to deal with reviews. I don't want to have hard conversations when somebody's being a jerk. And I'm like, well, then you're not a leader, right? Right. So, so that's great. I know we're bumping up against the hour, and I want to make sure we touch on a personal stuff that you wanted to cover. Just for people to know, Andrew's a big Ironman. I've always done that. When did you start doing the Ironman stuff?
So I think I did my first smaller ones back in 04, 05. So yeah. I was right before Endeca, and then I really started getting into it at Endeca. And it's, I think my first Ironman was 2012. I did another one in 17, and that's it for me. I prefer the half. So I've been doing like kind of a couple half Ironman a year, probably since 2006. So yeah, it's been fun.
And you're always raising for charity as well too, right? Like
I did for the big one. So for the marathon and for the Ironman, I felt like if I'm going to commit to that level, then I need to commit to raising money. The one time I didn't, I trained for Ironman Maryland. It was pure selfish, and I ended up walking away from the race because it was too dangerous with flooding conditions, etc. Yep. But I don't think I would have walked away if I had raised money.
Oh, that's an interesting point. Like, you see the people who drop dead when they're running for a cause, like my mom died of cancer, I'm going to run for the Jimmy Fund and stuff like that, where they just keep pushing and they keep pushing because they're doing it for something. I walked away from a Spartan 10 mile because it would not have been a good situation. Like it was like 110 degrees that day.
Yeah, no, you do it for safety reasons.
Yeah. So that's great. Anything else that you wanted to sort of cover or talk about while we're on, or?
No, I think this has been great, Jeff. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, no, I'd love to catch up in 6 months to 12, and we'll talk, of course, but just to see sort of how the perspectives have gone, what sort of challenges and new types of challenges you've bumped into, and who'd you use as mentorship and in the new role and things like that. That would be great. That's awesome. Look forward to it. Good luck with the rest of your series. Thank you. I appreciate it. And you have a good rest of the day and get your rest before you start the new job. Get my naps in. Naps are very critical. Especially if we're doing all the workouts you're doing, Jeff. Come on. You too. You know what? Working from home, I will say it is nice to be able to squeeze in, set the alarm for 15 minutes, close your eyes, and then wake up and meditate. That's right. Definitely meditate at the beginning of the day. I think that's helped a lot since you've known me over the years. Calm it down a little bit. But you do what you need to do in the world that we're living in today, Andrew. Right. So with that, I will sign off. And thanks so much. And look forward to chatting soon. Thank you, Jeff. Talk to you later.